In the last lecture, we created a login effect for handling the login request. So currently what happens is, here, if I enter a valid email and password, and when I click on this login button, let me clear everything here. So when I click on this login button, a login request will be sent to the Firebase Auth API, and the user will be logged in, and in the response we will receive the data related to the logged in user, like the email of the user, the access token, the refresh token, the ID of the user, etc. So if I click on this login button, you see the login request has been sent. We do not have any error. That means login is successful. And with the response, we will receive the response data. So here we have response header. If I go to the response tab here, you can see this is the response we are receiving. Currently, we are not saving this response. We are not saving this data anywhere. But now what we want is, we want to save this data in the user state which we have created. So if I go to state.ts file, here we have this user state. So we want to assign this user state with a user object which will store all this information which we have received in the response. For that, what we are doing is, from the effect, once the login request is sent and the user is logged in, we are going to receive a response. And here, this data is going to receive that response. And once the login is successful, from within this effect, we are calling another action, which is login success. And to that, we are passing the received data as the payload. So this data is receiving the response data from the login. We are assigning it to this user property, and we are sending it as the payload for this login success action. So now we are going to handle this login success action, and since this login success action does not involve any side effects, we can handle it using a reducer. So we are going to create a reducer now. So for now, let me go ahead and let me close these files, and let's open auth.reducer.ts. Currently, if you see, we have not created any reducer. I mean, we have created this auth reducer, and to that we are passing the initial state, and this initial state is nothing but the auth state object. Now, as the second argument, we are going to use on method, and here we are going to handle login success action. And when this login success action happens, in that case, we want to execute a callback function. This callback function is going to receive the current state and the payload, if any. So here for the payload, I am going to call it as action. Okay. Now from within here, we are going to return a new state, a new auth state. Here, first we are going to extract all the properties from the auth state, and then we are going to override the user state. And what do we want to assign this user state with? We want to assign it with action.user, because this action is going to have a user property. That's what we are dispatching from here, right? We are dispatching an object where we have a user property with the response data. All right, and to use this on method, we also need to import it from NgRx Store. So let's also specify that. Now we will see how to display this user data in the UI in a bit. But what I'm also going to do is, before returning this state, I'm also going to log the action, or maybe I'll log the action.user. So we know that this action, it is going to have two properties, type and the user property, which we are specifying explicitly. So I want to log that user. And when this login success will be dispatched, when we will click on the login button here, first it is going to dispatch login start action. That login start action will be handled by this effect. And once the login is success, once this login method has returned us a success response, it has not returned any error, then this method will be called, and from there we are returning login success action. So at that time, login success action will also get dispatched, and that will be handled by this reducer. So if I go back and let's go to console this time, let me clear everything. Let's pass test@gmail.com. This is the email ID which we have created. This is the user which we have created in the Firebase. And the password for that is test1234. If I click on this login button, you see this object has been logged in the response. Now from where this object has been logged, if you see, it is logged from auth.reducer.ts file from line number 8. And at line number 8 in auth.reducer.cs, we have this console.log statement. So from there, this user is getting logged, and in this user, we have these properties. So if I expand this, here we have display name, email, expires in, ID token, kind, all those things, all the information. Now what I want is, I want to display the email of the logged in user in, let's say, this header component. So let's try to do that. Let's go back to our application, and here let's go to header component, and there I'll open header component.ts. Here we want to use the user state of auth state. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to inject an instance of store class. So here I'm going to create a constructor, and using this constructor, we are going to create a private property called store, and this is going to be of type store. And here I'm going to specify the type, and I'm going to specify the type as app state. Okay. And in order to use this store also, we need to import it. So let's go ahead and let's import it from NgRx Store. All right, so in this way, we will have an instance of store inside this store property. Next, what we are going to do is, and before that, let's also go to appstate.ts file. And currently, these two states, they are getting lazily loaded. So from here, I'm going to remove these two states. We don't need them here. And also, if you remember, in the app module.ts, when we are specifying the state, there we are passing an empty object. But here also, I can go ahead and I can specify app reducer. Okay, and to use it, we are already importing it. So we will simply use it. And what this app reducer is storing, it is storing an empty object. So just like how we were passing empty object earlier, now instead of passing an empty object directly, we are creating an empty object. We are assigning it to this app reducer, and that we are passing to this forRoot method of store module. So this is one change I want to do, because in our coming lectures, we are going to add application wide state to this object. So at that time, we anyway will have to add it in this object and pass it to the forRoot method, but I'm doing it now only. And from here also, let's remove these two properties from the app state interface. Let's save the changes, and let's close this file as well as app-module.ts file. All right, now in the header component, we have the store. Now what I'm going to do is, here I'm going to create a property, and I'll call it as logged user. You can call it anything. And this logged user is going to store an observable. So I'll call it as logged user dollar. All right. And this is going to store an observable, which is going to emit an observable of type user. And to use it, let's also import it. I'm not going to initialize it here. Next, what we are going to do is, for the header component, let's go ahead and let's implement on init interface. Okay, and since we are implementing on init interface, we also need to provide the definition for ng on init lifecycle hook. And in here, using this store, we are going to select the current value of user state. So here I can say this dot store dot select. And if you remember, in the last lecture, we have created a selector. So in the auth folder, if I go to states folder, and if we go to auth selector.ts, you will see that here we have created a selector called getLoggedUser. And what it is going to return us? It is going to return us the current value of user state. So I'm going to use this selector in the header component. So the selector name is getLoggedUser. And to use it, we also need to import it. Now this here, it is going to return us an observable, and we are going to assign that observable to logged user dollar property. Okay, let's save the changes here. And now we want to use this logged user in the view template of header component. So let's go to the view template of header component, And here we are displaying the login link, sign up link, and logout button. So for now, what I'll do is here before the login link, I'll create another anchor tag. Let me also specify href here. And for now, let's simply assign pound to it. And here let's use template literal syntax. Okay, inside this template literal syntax, we are going to use logged user dollar property. Now this here, it is going to receive an observable, and on this I'm going to use async pipe. So for that pipe, we will use this pipe symbol, and here I'm going to use async pipe. And once we have the data inside this logged user dollar, because as we learned, it is going to receive an observable, and once it has received the data from the observable, on that I'm going to access the email property, and I want to display this email in the header. Let's save the changes. Let's go back to our application, and now you will see that we have an error. So let me click on this OK button. Let's go to home page. Let me clear everything here, and let's refresh the page, and you will see that we have an error, and it says cannot read property of null reading email. And let me also scroll to the top, and let's go to the first error. So here it says cannot read property of null reading email. Now why we have this error? We have this error because initially, if I go to the state, so if you go to the auth state, initially this user is null. So when the page will be loaded for the first time, this user will be null. And on that null, we are trying to access the email property. So that's why we have the error. But here what we are going to do is we are going to use null equalizing operator. So if this value, if this expression returns null or undefined, in that case, it will not try to access the email property on that null value or undefined. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go back to our application. And now we have another error. So it says cannot read property of undefined reading user. And where this error has occurred? This error has occurred in auth.selector.ts file at line number 10. Now let's go back to auth.selector.ts. So for now, let's close this reducer file, this effect file, and this module file. Let's open auth.selector.ts. And at line number 10, we are trying to access user on this state. And in the error, you can see it says that cannot read property of undefined. So we are trying to read this user on undefined. This simply means that for some reason, this state is undefined. Now, why this state is undefined? Remember that this state is nothing but this auth state. And we are lazily loading this auth state. This auth state will be available only after the auth module has been loaded. Currently, the auth module has not been loaded. Initially, when the page loads, it eager loads the app. Here, when we will move to login page or sign up page, then only the auth module will be loaded. And when the auth module will be loaded, then only this auth state will be available, because we are also loading this auth state lazily. If I go back to our application, and if we go to Redux, and if we go to state, currently you will see that the state is empty. We do not have any state currently. When I move to counter, the counter state will be available. It will be lazily loaded. When I go to courses, the courses state will be loaded. And now when I go to login or sign up, so if I scroll down, you will see that auth state is still not loaded. But if I go to login or sign up, after that only the auth state is available. So initially when the page loads, the auth state is not available. It will only be available once the auth module is loaded. And the reason for that is we are loading this auth state lazily. And since this auth state is not available during the initial load, that's why this state here, basically this object here, it will be undefined. It is not available during the initial load. And on that undefined, in the selector, we are trying to access this user property. And that's why we have this error. Now to resolve this error, what we need to do is, since we want to use a state which is created in auth module in the header component, and header component is not part of auth module. It is part of app module. So since we want to use a state from one module into another module, instead of lazily loading this this auth state, we are still going to load the auth module lazily, but we are not going to load this auth state lazily. So in order to not load this auth state lazily, we have to do two changes. First, let's go to auth.module.ts, and from there we need to remove this store module forFeature. So using this, we are loading the auth state lazily, but now I don't want to load this auth state lazily, so I'll remove this. Remember that module will be loaded lazily, but now the state which we are creating inside this module, that will not get loaded lazily. And from here, let's also remove these three import statements. We are going to load the auth module eagerly. That means during the initial load of our Angular application, the auth state should be available. And for that, we need to go to our app module. For this app module, if you see, we are specifying this app reducer, and this app reducer is nothing but this object. So in there, we are going to specify auth underscore state. So we are going to import this. This auth state is storing a string value, which is auth, that will be the state name. And to that, we need to map this state with a reducer. And to which reducer we want to map it? We want to map it to auth reducer. So let's map it here. And in the interface also, let's specify the type. So in the interface, again, we are going to specify a property. The property name should be the value stored in auth state. So again, it should be auth underscore state. Okay. In this auth state, we are storing a string value called auth. If I go to constants, this auth state is storing the string value auth. So this should be the property name, and the type of this should be auth state. So we also need to import this auth state from auth folder. Inside that we have states folder, and inside that we have auth.state.ts file. So from there we are going to import this. With this, let's save the changes. And now remember that the auth state will be eagerly loaded. It will not be lazily loaded. That means the auth state will be available for our Angular application after the initial load, after the first load of the Angular application. And with this, let's quickly check if we have any error. The application has compiled successfully. Let's go back to our application. And now you will see that, let me go to home page here, and let's reload the page. And now you will see that after the initial load itself, this auth state is available. And now if I go to console, we still have that error. Let me comment it and let's reload the page. Okay, we might have this error because here, since we are using this property name, we need to wrap it within square brackets. Then only that string value will be considered as a property name. And in the same way here also, we need to wrap it within square brackets. Then only that string value will be considered as a property name. With this, let's save the changes. Let's go back to our application. And now that error is not there. Now let's go to login component. And before that, let me also show you that this auth state is loaded. Now let's go to login component. And let me move this a little bit down, and here let's try to log in a user. So here I'll provide the email as test@gmail.com. This is the user which we have created in our Firebase project, and the password for that is test1234. And when I log in this user, you will see that the email of that user is being displayed here. So the user is logged in, the auth state changed, and there the user was assigned with the user object, and from there we are reading the email and we are displaying the email of the logged in user. All right, and what we can also do is, let's go to HeaderComponent.html. Now this login and sign up link we need only if a user is not logged in. If the user is logged in, then we only want to show this logout button and the email of the user. So what I'll do is I'll cut this line from here. I'll paste it after the sign up. Okay, and here I'm going to add a span element, and inside that span, let's put this login and sign up, and let's add another span, and inside this span, I'm going to put the email of the logged in user and the logout button. Let me format the document a little bit. And now we want to show login and sign up if no user is logged in. And when no user is logged in that case, user will be null, right? So here we are going to use ngIf. To this, we are going to assign an expression, and in that expression, we are going to use logged user dollar, and on that, we are going to use async pipe, because we know that this logged user dollar is going to get an observable. So once we have received data from that observable, for that we are waiting for the data to come using this async pipe. So once we have received the data for this logged user, if it has an object, that means a user is logged in. So in that case, we don't want to display login and sign up link. So here I'm going to use not operator before this expression. Okay, and I'm going to copy this same ngIf. Let's paste it on this span. Now we want to display the email of the user and the logout button if we have a logged in user. That means if this logged user dollar has received a user object. So from here, I will remove this not operator. Let's save the changes. Let's go back to our application. So initially you will only see login and sign up link because currently no user is logged in. Let's go ahead and let's log in a user. So for that, let's say John, not John, test@gmail.com, and password is test1234. And when I click on this login button, now you will see the email of the logged in user and the logout button. So I hope now you know how the NgRx effect works. This is all from this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.